In this lesson, we're going to take just a moment to step away from coding for a brief time and talk about the MVC pattern. So the MVC pattern is a pattern that's been around for a long time, and it's where we're really trying to get to as we start to build our skills here in our web development. Now, MVC stands for Model View Controller. So we're going to take some time here in this lesson to discuss each one of these and their particular role in the MVC pattern. And then we'll look at where we're at, talk about our progress, and start planning for where we really want to get to as we continue to grow. So first, let's take a look at what a model is. A model is essentially going to be our object classes. And in these object classes, we're going to have things about business logic that we need to take care of. Now, this may be database interaction or interaction with objects like a city object if we're going to be displaying cities on the web, or other things like that. I want to be sure that it's clear that MVC doesn't apply to just web development. MVC can actually be used for any system development. What ultimately ends up happening is we have the three different layers, and so what we really want is when we build our models, we specifically don't want to be locked into any type of presentation layer. So we definitely want to have our model separate from that presentation layer, and the model will therefore be reusable or interchangeable into other systems that might have a completely different view. And we, of course, then have this model in place and it's reusable, so we may even create that in an entirely different project and port that in as a jar file or some other library that we can reference, rather than actually having all of our code available right in the same project. Well, what's the view then? Well, the view is going to be our presentation layer to the user. So this could be a web page, it could be an application on the desktop, it could be a console. Ultimately, it doesn't matter what the view is, it's just the view is used for the user interaction. So what we're seeing here in the web development, so far we've seen that we have HTML that's doing a lot of our view information. Now, some of that HTML is right in HTML files. Some of it we've actually generated in the servlets and spit out to an HTML to show that view information back to our user. So we've seen that that's not really so good. First of all, there isn't anything we can really do with objects in HTML. We can maybe do a little more in HTML5 now as that's continuing to grow, but what we've seen in the plain old HTML that we've been using is it's pretty powerless. It just essentially renders a few things. So it's not really so good. It's not a real good example. And what we'll see then is that JSP is going to ultimately be a little bit better when we move forward. And so we're going to start using that in our web system as our main view generation mechanism. And then what we'll see as we even grow into the future as better web programmers is that when we start combining JSP with client scripts and styles, we'll end up with an even better solution for presenting data onto the web. Essentially, the view exists so that we can give our users a way to interact with the controller, which will then interact with the model. So that brings us to the controller. So what is the controller for? Well, the controller is in place to give us some application logic that is different than business logic. So the application logic is going to be information like taking requests and sending requests, and being able to communicate between view and model and direct all that in a method that makes our application robust. So it'll make calls to the models, get some information, set that into session, use some context variables, init parameters, whatever it needs to do, pass information around maybe between a couple different servlets, and ultimately then render all that information out by passing it into a view, which will then present it to the user. So where are we at right now? Well, right now, we definitely have too much going on in our servlets, because our servlets right now are acting as the entire MVC. We have model information in our servlets, we have view information in our servlets, spitting out some HTML, and we have controller information, basically taking requests and handling things. So we need to start moving business logic to object models so that we can separate all of that out of our controller. And we also need to figure out a better way that we can then render the information into a view rather than just plain old HTML. So we'll start looking at JSP soon, and that will give us a better way to render some of that information onto the view portion. So what we've seen is that MVC is an important pattern as we move into development, not just for the web, but for all business logic applications. Using MVC can allow us to have the ability to have a system that's more robust, which allows for easier maintenance. Separation of concerns gives us the ability to easily interchange parts and not have to rework an entire system. And we definitely have a lot of learning to do to get to where we really want to go to start leveraging the full power of the MVC.